It's finally here, the complete attacking tutorial for FC 25. And this tutorial will be broken up into 24 segments. These include the basics, how to finish, aiming power-up shots, scoring 100% chances, long shots, scoring headers, jumping higher than your opponent, passing philosophy, passing tempo, rushing versus tempo, beating team press, skill move passes, through balls, taking touches, sprinting, skill moves including the ball roll, elastico, reverse elastico, Megiddy cancel, L1 speed boost, skill move combos, breaking down defenses including ball recycling and player lock, holding up the ball, crossing guides including player positioning and the German cross, corner routines, free kicks, attacking throw-ins, and the best formations and tactics. Let's get started. First up, the basics. Now to shoot, all you need to do is hold in the circle button. For the low driven shot, however, you need to only tap under 25% of the power for it to be a low driven shot. The player will drive it with his laces, and I must say it's a very good technique to score when you are close to keepers. The finesse shot, of course, is R1 and shoot. Now I have warned about this in the 5-minute attacking tutorial, but finesse shots are terrible this year and you want to avoid them like the plague. Power up shot, L1, R1 and the shoot button. I'll be teaching you how to aim that very shortly. Chip shots, these include L1 and the shoot button for the player to dink the ball over the keeper. Timing shots, it's double tapping the shot button, and of course there was a complete guide to time finishing uploaded onto the channel, so you can go and check that out. Trivela shots or Trivela passes that can be performed with L2 and then subsequently the shot or the pass button afterwards, and pass is of course the X button. Driven pass is R1 pass, which is R1X. Through balls are triangle, and then if you want to loft those through balls, it's L1 and triangle. Threaded precise through balls is L1 and R1 and the triangle button, and this is good for when you want to thread the ball through some space for your attacker to run onto. Crossing is of course square, and the lofted cross is L1 and square, which is a more dinked version of the cross. And then you have the driven cross, which is double tapping the square button. We then have dribbling with the left stick, and as I have mentioned, you need to be light and caressed on this, and I will go into more detail in a later segment, but you don't want to be too heavy, otherwise the player will be too heavy on the ball. We have sprint dribbling, which is R1 to drive at defenders, and then of course agile dribbling, which is L1. You can implement that with the L1 speed boost, which I will be teaching very shortly. To sprint, it's R2, and shielding is L2, with player lock being R3 and L3 pressed down together, and then you're flicking the right stick towards a player that you desire. Firstly, how to finish. Now I did mention this in the 5-minute tutorial, but in general, the far post is the most sufficient post to finish this year. It's not like FIFA 20 where near post shots were overpowered. In the majority of situations, you need to aim for the far post. And that's of course because keepers, as they should, save more shots than not to the near post. So aim for that far post. And speaking of aiming, I want to teach you how to aim the power up shot. Now the power up shot is a very important shooting technique for shooting long shots this year, and just in general adding more power to your shot to convert more shots to goals in your attacking game. However, the accuracy of the power up shot, as we know, is rather lacking, and it's very hard at times to aim the power up shot. But there is a technique that I use to do this, and that's by aiming directly at the keeper and then swerving or rotating your left stick or thumb to the left or right of that keeper. And what that does is help you line up the shot towards the goal and then alter either left or right to which post you want to aim to. And I find this is much more efficient than just aiming to a side, because the majority of the time you will miss the goal. And that brings me into low driven shots. And what I find is if you're one-on-one with the keeper, you need to slot these shots into the goal. And it's not a matter of powering up the shot because the keeper is coming out at you and he's shutting down that angle. No, you want to tap the shoot button to slot it under him, and I find they're very effective in one-on-one situations. So when you're finishing in the box, tap the shoot button for a low driven finish. I also want to talk about first time shots. Now, although they are not like FIFA 19, they are still effective if you're in a position where you may be under pressure if you were to take that touch. First time shots may be the viable option. Now, if you are timing these, it will benefit you even more. So you should consider first time shots only in positions or situations where you are under pressure. However, I wouldn't recommend spamming them like we did in FIFA 19. We then have Trivela shots. Now, I will say they are nowhere near as effective compared to previous years, including FC 24. Trivela shots have been patched. And if I'm honest, they're very similar to finesse shots. I find finesse shots or Trivela shots this year just don't work, and they seem to go closer to the keeper. In general, I find regular power shots are much better compared to any Trivela or finesse. But with that being said, speaking of converting shots, I recommend always trying to set yourself up for the 100% chance. What is this, might you ask? It's looking for the extra pass. You need to increase your percentages of conversion in FC 25 because FC 25 is a percentage game. If you're going to shoot in a position where the percentage of the conversion may be 60% in comparison to an extra pass into an attacker in the box in a much better position for a conversion of 95 or 100%, then it's just more viable for you to find that extra pass. So you really should, in the box, open your vision up. Stop being tunnel visioned and only focusing on the goal, but rather focus on the players around you and who is in a better position, because the extra pass may be the most viable in that attacking situation. I now want to talk about long shots. Now, what I find is long shots in general are not that effective this year unless you use a power-up shot technique or you're shooting from outside the box and you're in line with the two posts. What I mean by that is, in previous years, you may have been able to do a long shot from the side out towards the edge of the 18-yard box. It's not that effective this year. However, I find long shots from outside the box, but in line with the two posts, are rather effective, and they go in a lot of the time if you aim for that far post. And the other thing I must say is, power-up shots, they're actually quite effective from distance, and if you can aim correctly using the technique I taught before, you will be able to convert more power-up shot long shots this year in FC 25. With that being said, don't focus on trying to score long shots. You will only get better at FC 25 if you can learn to work the ball into the box and break down your opponent, all of which I will be teaching in this video. But I must say, don't just focus on scoring long shots, work on working the ball into the box. Moving on to scoring headers. Now, what I will say about this is the height that you can jump above the defender will increase the percentage of your header going into the back of the net. And what determines the height of the jump? It's the power on the shot. Now, I'm going to add a slight disclaimer here. As you know, if you're going to power up the shot to 100%, the header's going to go over the bar. You need to have around 2 or 3 bars of power, and this is going to maximize the jump of the attacker whilst balancing the power of the shot so that it will actually go into the back of the net and not over the bar. So I find the most sufficient amount of bars of power to actually header the ball onto goal is around 2.5 to 3 bars. This will ensure the header goes into the top corner, and it also ensures that you're jumping higher enough above the defender to get the header on target. Now we've got finishing out of the way, I think it's important to move on to passing, simply because passing is the core heart and crux of our build up and our attack in FC 25. And I know the majority of you guys are struggling big time. And that's simply because EA did add in passing adjustments to FC 25 to make it more realistic. You can't just pass while your body is pivoted towards the other direction to where you want to pass to. You cannot pass this year at a 180-degree angle, nor even a 90-degree angle. You need to pass in a more realistic fashion, and that means taking touches towards where you need to go next, and I'll get into that very shortly. But in general, you want to ensure that your angle of body shape is at least 45 degrees to the attacker you want to pass to next. And that is the philosophy of passing in FC 25 to a T. It is body shape. Body shape is so important, and this will come into play when you are taking touches. And the best way for you to actually build up and pass in FC 25 is to think ahead. Because if you're not thinking ahead, you're not going to take a touch in the optimal direction to set your body shape up for the next pass that you want to execute. And this is done when you firstly take the ball to space, but secondly, take the ball to the space that is more optimal for the next pass. If Another thing I want to say about passing is regular XA passes or driven passes are the meta this year. You see, in previous years, through balls would be sometimes the more overpowered way of passing in FIFA. However, what I will say is, if you're going to through ball, unfortunately I find defenders do lock on to through balls a lot more compared to previous years. And in general, I find the most effective way to pass this year is to focus more on your XA passes and driven passes. And expanding on driven passes, I find they're very effective. And there's one thing you need to look for when it comes to driven passes in FC25, and that is passing channels. You see, people fall into the trap of passing when there is a defender in the passing lane, and this is just not viable enough for you to pass or attack in FC25. You need to ensure before you hit that driven pass there is a direct channel in line with the attacker that you want to hit. However, if that channel is present, I'm telling you now, driven passes lock on very effectively this year, and you can utilize them and abuse them in your attack to, number one, increase tempo, and number two, break down your opponents. And a good way to break down your opponents is driven passes into regular passes. So if you see an attacker you want to hit the driven pass and then hit a regular pass into the next attacker. And that of course takes into account the fact that you are thinking ahead, as I spoke about before, but in general it's a very good way to be quick with your build up and increase the tempo to break down your opponent and be more unpredictable. And that does bring me into passing with tempo. And what I will say is passing with tempo is certainly harder to sustain compared to, let's say, FC23 or FC24. You see, tempo will determine whether you can actually break down your opponent, because if you are too slow with your passes and you're not proactively thinking ahead, the opponent has more time to adjust his defense and keep his shape, meaning it's going to be a lot harder for you to break him down. Hence, I do recommend, if there are first time passes available at that 45-degree angle, you need to take them, simply because taking first time passes increases that tempo and makes it harder for your opponent to adjust. However, I will say, as a disclaimer, you need to focus on your touches this year, and if that angle isn't quite there, avoid the first time pass. Instead, take a touch and then release the ball. With that being said, it is important for me to say that you should not rush. And I will say to you now, passing tempo is a lot different to rushing. You see, rushing is attempting to get on goal as quick as possible without having a fundamental build-up strategy, whereas attacking tempo is having structure to your build-up and ensuring that your passes are not pointless passes, but they are quick and they are decisive in your build-up. And that is how you can ensure that you're not going to rush forward, but instead you're just maintaining a high tempo in your attack, be more unpredictable and break down your opponent. Next up, I want to talk about 1-2s and triangle passing. You see, if you are proactively thinking ahead, you obviously have in mind how you're going to try and break down your opponent in that given moment. And let's say if you're on the wing, there will be situations where you want to play those 1-2 passes around the wing backs, around the centre backs and the midfielders to ensure you can link up play on the wing. And of course, the way you do that is by holding in L1 whilst you pass to ensure that you release the ball and then the player makes a run subsequently after passing the ball. And this is how you can actually beat opponents on the wing and in various situations where they have defenders, and you can play those 1-2 triangle passes to ensure that you are more unpredictable and getting in behind. Another tip is to, when you're building up, envision triangles on the pitch. Don't just look at the pitch or the players as players themselves, but in general, look at them as objects and as shapes and as patterns on the pitch. And this will help you visualize how you can break down your opponent and pass around his press with triangle passes and give and goes. And another tip to passing is utilizing the come and receive trigger, which is holding or tapping the R1 button whilst you point the left stick towards a player you want to come and receive the ball. And this in general will give you more options when it comes to building up, and it's very effective, let's say when you pass to your wing back and you need that winger coming towards you to offer for an option. Before you receive the ball with the wing back, you can tap the R1 button towards the winger to ensure he proceeds to come towards you and offer for an option so that you can release the ball quickly, hence increasing your passing tempo. Finally, I want to talk about skill move passes, and we're going to get into skill moves a little bit later, but what I will say is, if you perform a pass subsequently after a skill move, it will increase the accuracy by tenfold. And this is just something that's been in the game for the past 2 years. And what I will say is there is one skill move in particular that will benefit you before performing a pass, and that is the ball roll. The ball roll pass, because it is a skill move, not only increases the accuracy, but it also gets you angles for the pass so that you can offload the ball in tight angles. As I said, angles and body positioning are the most important aspect to your build up and passing plays, and the ball roll pass is the best skill move in FC25 to utilize when attempting to perform a pass inside or to get a better angle for the pass that you want to execute. Now, the ball roll is performed by holding the right analog stick to the left or right of the player and then pressing the pass button subsequently afterwards. I now want to talk about through balls and 3 key rules that you want to stand by when through balling in FC25. If the attacker is in open space, then you want to use a regular through ball. If the attacker is between defenders, then you're wanting to use a threaded L1 and R1 through ball to ensure you can thread the through ball through the space so that the attacker can then run onto the ball. And lastly, if the attacker is being marked, you want to perform an over the top through ball, and this ensures that you can get away from the defender who is marking him and ensure that the attacker can run in behind in those situations. If you can stick to those 3 rules when it comes to through balling, you will increase your through ball conversion rate by tenfold, and I promise this will help you break down opponents. With that being said, I did say before, you need to focus on trying to build up with ETS and driven passes in FC25 because through balls are a form of rushing. Moving on to taking a touch. Now, there are 2 things you want to avoid when it comes to taking a touch, and that is taking a touch whilst holding sprint and taking a touch towards the pressure. You see, if you take a touch when you're sprinting, the touch will be way too large and your opponent will be able to pounce on you in no time and you won't have any control of the ball. And secondly, you need to take a touch to space, and it's similar to the technique that I taught you in terms of dribbling in my 5-minute dribbling tutorial. You need to look at where the space is when receiving that ball in and dribbling around, or in general when taking a touch, because if you look towards the defender approaching you, you'll be more inclined to take the ball into that direction and it will leave you vulnerable to a tackle. Hence, my tip is to always take a touch to space. And expanding on that, when taking a touch, I highly recommend taking a touch to ensure that your back is towards the opponent. You see, there are times when there is space in multiple directions, but really is the space you're taking it towards going to keep your back totally towards the approaching defender? If it's not, then unfortunately what will happen is he'll be able to sweep his leg around you and get a tackle in. Hence, you want to focus on taking it to space as well as keeping your back to the opponent. Moving on to skill moves. Now, I want to add a quick disclaimer before going into teaching the 5 best skill moves that you need to learn for FC25, and that is, you should avoid skill moves until you are in the box. You see, when you watch a high caliber attacker play, they rarely steal in the midfield or in the defense. They focus on trying to build it into the key areas first before hitting a skill move to create that space and create the angle for the shot. However, the 5 skill moves that I want to teach today include the ball roll, elastico, reverse elastico, McGeady spin cancel, and L1 speed boost. The ball roll can be performed by holding the right analog stick to the left or right of where the player is facing, and of course this is so effective for creating passing angles, taking the ball away from approaching defenders, or in general taking the ball into space to keep your back to the opponent. Next, we have the elastico. You need a 5-star skiller for this skill move, and to perform it, you need to enter in with the right analog stick to the right of the player and where he is facing, and then rotate that around to the back of him, and he will do a flip-flap motion, and it is very effective for creating angles for shots in the box, and it is also very effective off the back of a stop. So if you L1 stop and elastico, it's a lot quicker in the execution and harder to defend against. And speaking of harder to defend against, the reverse elastico, such an effective skill move and very hard to react against when jockeying, specifically in the bots. And again, it's one of those skills that you can perform when you've stopped and you're standing still and you then hit the reverse elastico. Now, it's a reverse movement. You enter in to the left of the player and then rotate around to the back of him with the right analog stick, and he will do a reverse flip-flap motion. Next up, the Magidi spin cancel, another 5-star skill move. It's very effective this year. If you can hit this in the box, you'll create angles for days when it comes down to shooting. Now to perform it, you need to flick forwards and then to the side of where the player is facing, and then as he's performing the Magidi spin, you want to cancel it with L2 and R2 whilst using the left stick to point towards the direction that you want to face once you've cancelled it. And what I will say is, it is so effective, creating angles and getting past defenders' blocks. Very, very good skill move this year. And last but not least, the devil's advocate of FC25. L1 speed boost. It is broken and it needs to be patched. I don't think it will be though, because the step over speed boost was patched and EA needed another alternative. To perform it, you need to hold in L1 and then transition into an R2, and what the player will do is burst instantly off the spot, and if you can hit this through gaps, through 2 defenders, it glitches and the player instantly gets up to around 110-120% speed in comparison to his regular sprint speed, and it is super broken. Every pro is using it this year. Now I think it is important to add a segment about skill move combinations. Now you can combine skill moves in FC25 and even in previous years, and depending on what skill moves you're combining, they're actually very effective. Now there's one that I want to teach you for this attacking tutorial that I think you should be definitely trying to use on the wing or in the bots, and that is the ball roll scoop. Now you need a 5-star skiller for this, but essentially what you need to do is execute the ball roll, so that's entering in with the right stick to the left or right of the player where he is facing, and then you want to perform a fade shot, which is either cross or shoot with the pass button pressed subsequently afterwards, and you're pointing the left stick towards the direction you want to scoop. And what I will say is, if there's space in and around the bots or behind you that you want to hit, it's so good for hitting that space because you can exit in any direction with this ball roll scoop, and it's very hard to defend against because of how instant and quick it is. It's very good for creating angles in the bots to shoot and also beating defenders. Next up, we have left opposite. A lot of people are most certainly struggling this year, and I want to give you quite a few tips in this attacking tutorial on how to dribble. Firstly, I want to address the elephant in the room in terms of why people struggle to dribble. It's because of where they look. You see, if you're looking at the defender when dribbling, you're going to be more inclined to swerve towards him with your hand-eye coordination. I use the analogy of skiing. When skiers go down a hill, they look at the path, not the tree. If they look at the tree, they'll go towards the tree. It's a similar concept when you're dribbling. Always look at the space. Now in terms of actually improving your agility on the ball when left stick dribbling, you want to focus on being light and caressed on the left stick. It's a feather touch, okay? And that will increase your agility on the ball. Now depending on what situation you're in will depend on what movement you want to make on the left stick. If you're trying to feint a defender away, you want to chop the left stick back and forth very lightly until he commits, and then you want to exploit the space that's been left open. If you're wanting to dribble through space or channels in and around the defense, you want to roll the stick very light and caressed to ensure that you're rolling through that space and dribbling in and away from the defenders. Now, one thing you want to take into consideration is keeping your back to the opponent, and this comes into play when you're either rolling through space or chopping to beat a defender. And to do this, you need to ensure that you're holding the left stick around a 45-degree angle away from any pressure around you to ensure that his shoulder and back is turned towards the approaching defender to ensure that you can keep the ball away from him. If you dribble towards or around the vicinity of any pressure around you, you will get tackled. So ensure that you're looking at that space and you're keeping that 45-degree angle away from the approaching defender. Now, I want to talk about R1 dribbling. Not many people know this, but it's been changed this year and altered so that when you hold the R1 button, it will actually increase the agility and touches on the ball that the player is taking. And the good thing about R1 dribbling this year is that if you actually dribble to the side of where the player is facing or behind, his agility will increase by tenfold, and you'll notice you'll be able to turn away from tackles and weave in and out of spaces when using the R1 button whilst dribbling with the left stick. I actually think it's more effective in general compared to regular left stick dribbling, and you guys need to use it in FC25. We do have agile dribbling, but I just want to say it's not that good this year in my opinion. I think the only thing that's good for is the L1 speed boost, so ensure you're only utilizing it for that. I just find the agile dribbling technique is nowhere near as good as regular left stick dribbling with a light touch or the R1 dribbling technique. Next up, we have breaking down defenses. And the most efficient technique of breaking someone down is recycling the ball from the wing. If you cross compare previous years, pros have always done this. They take the ball to the wing, they drag the defense out, and then they recycle into the middle very quickly so that they can exploit the space that's been left open. And this is how you want to break down your opponent. You want to take the ball wide when building up to drag the defense and open up space. You see, people make the mistake all the time of attacking down the center, and all this does is forces them off the ball. They get squeezed by the opponent and have nowhere to go. So I highly recommend focusing your attack down the wing, and this can be done with various player roles and meta tactics, which I did break down in my player roles and meta tactics video, so you should go and check that out. But in general, take the ball to the wing to break down your opponent. And in terms of breaking someone down, I want to talk about player lock, because this is a very effective way to get in behind quite quickly if you can player lock quick enough and run your striker or winger along the defensive line. It's a very good way or method to drag your attacker away from any defender, and I find it super effective in FC25. To perform it, just tap in or hold in L3 and R3 together and then flick the right stick towards the attacker that you need, and then start making a run with him, because the ball carrier will then be controlled by the AI. You can then through ball through to him or even just perform an irregular pass, but it's a good way to actually drag the attacker away from the defender and get in behind quite quickly to break down your opponent. Now you of course have play a lot fake, and this is good to be more unpredictable in your attack. You can fake your player lock by selecting the attacker on the ball, making a run with him, but then as the AI player or attacker is running through the space with the ball, you can switch back to him by pressing in L3 and R3 together at the same time, and it's a very good way of deceiving your opponent, because he will most likely track the attacker you have control of, whilst that AI attacker on the ball exploits the space, and it's very good to be one step ahead and be proactive with your attack in FC25. And I want to expand on breaking down defenses and essentially talk about holding up the ball, because what I will say is if you can hit your striker's feet and dribble in throughout the space backwards, what will happen is your opponent will be more enticed to follow him out and drag a defender out of his position. And that's how you can create gaps and spaces in the defense. It's by hitting the striker, forcing the opponent to follow you and drag his defenders out of their positions. And what will then subsequently happen is your other attackers will run through those holes and those gaps so that you can actually exploit the space that's been left open. And it's a very effective way of breaking down your opponent. You can also shield with this, so if you are dribbling back and you're essentially being put under pressure by your opponent and the defender behind you, you can tap the shield button, L2, and that ensures you can shoulder him away as you're attempting to try and hold up the ball for a bit longer before you thread that through ball or pass through. And speaking of shielding, if you are in behind, ensure you're tapping the shield button quite lightly as the opponent is on your tail to ensure that you protect the ball and shove him off. Don't hold it, but tap it as you become close with the attacker, because if you hold it, he'll actually lose momentum and most likely will lose out to the defender. Next up, we have crossing, and in general how to cross. Now, as I said, there are many techniques to cross in the basic segment, but what I will say is player positioning is the most important aspect to you crossing in FC25. If your attacker is anywhere near a defender in the box, do not cross. You should only cross if the attacker is in between two defenders in space. And that's where being less tunnel vision comes into play, and essentially looking in the box to see the positioning of your attackers and whether they are being marked or not. And if you see that attacker in that space, then hit the more viable cross depending on the in-game situation, whether it needs to be a lob cross because there is a defender in front of him, or whether it needs to be a low driven cross because there's no defender in front of him but there's a defender defender behind him. In general, it's player positioning which is key to scoring crosses. With that being said, as a crossing disclaimer, I find working the ball into the box for a more clear-cut opportunity is much more important than crossing from the wing and hoping that your attacker is going to get an end of that ball. Because at the end of the day, it still will be a 50-50 with the defenders in the box, and if they can clear the ball effectively and know how to clear and position defenders, you would have benefited much more working the ball into a key area. I don't think it would be a complete attacking tutorial if I left out a German cross. Now, the German cross was brought to us a few years ago by a German pro, and that's why it's called the AKA German cross. And what it entails is a runner making a run from deep and you crossing from the width area as the attacker gets on the shoulder of the defender. Now, it is rather broken because the defensive line fails to track this attacker the majority of the time, and it's also hard to read because your opponent's not really focusing on that runner from deep. He's actually focusing on the ball carrier, so it can be very easy to break down your opponent if they're not staying alert. Now, to perform it, you need to trigger a run from deep either by controlling the ball and holding L1 to pass out wide, or pointing the left stick towards the attacker you want to make the run and tapping L1. You then want to face parallel to the sideline with your wing back before crossing. If you're facing straight towards the attacker making the run, the cross won't have the trajectory or curve that is recommended. You need to face parallel to the sideline to ensure it gets that whip, and as the attacker is on the shoulder of the defender, hit the German cross around 3 bars and it will lock on every time for you to score a goal. Next up is corners. Now, what I want to say about corners is very similar to what I said about crossing. I find it's much more beneficial for you to play it short and work it in, rather than crossing and hoping that your attacker will get on the end of the ball. With that being said, there is a technique where you do select the attacker and you run him towards the near post with about 2 or 3 bars of power on the cross, and he will get a head-on goal if you can time it right. To perform this, you use L1 to select the attacker that you want, and then you want to aim around the near post area with about 2 or 3 bars of power, and then start proceeding to make a run. You tap the X button, it loads up the power. You will then have control of the attacker that you selected. You then run him towards the area where you're going to cross, and then tap the cross button again. The crosser will whip it in and you can get on the end of that ball. With that being said, I recommend tapping R1, having someone come towards you, and then playing it out to the player who's on the edge of the 18-yard box to work it into a much key vital area. Free kicks is also very much the same, and this is not a complete free kick tutorial, it's a complete attacking tutorial, but I will teach you every free kick technique on the channel coming up in the next month or so. However, with that being said, the most viable and effective technique to perform free kicks is playing it short and having an attacker run over it to ensure that he then runs into a key area and you pass it into him to then score an easy one-on-one chance. Now, to do this, you want to tap R1 and L2, and then you hold R1 and perform a fake shot, and the player will run over the ball and you aim towards him, press the pass button, he will get in behind past the wall, and it's very effective to score goals. And I highly recommend doing this over any free kick technique. A few extra bonus segments. I want to talk about attacking throw-ins. There's an actual technique it can use to get in behind very quickly in a throw-in situation. Flick the right stick towards the attacker along the defensive line as soon as it cuts to the throw-in situation, and then start running him in behind and press the pass button. Player will throw it towards him and he will then run in behind the defensive line, and it's very hard to defend against because there's no offsides with throwing. Next up is driving to the byline. It's actually quite an effective technique to break down defenses. If you're in a situation where you are attacking on the wing, I recommend driving to the byline and looking central in towards the box, because if you can pass along the line, I call it the line ball, it's actually very effective to break down your opponent. And you will usually be able to do this if the attacker central is running towards the byline itself as well. And you can hit his feet along the line and then cut it back for a tap-in opportunity. I do also want to talk about the cross dink technique. Now, this is quite broken. If you see an attacker running in between the wing back and the centre back, just inside the 18-yard box while you're on the wing, if you just tap the cross button, it will lock on 95% of the time. Guaranteed. It's very broken, very meta. You can then create scoring opportunities from that. Lastly is formations and tactics. Now, I'm going to have more in-depth tactics and formations videos on the channel broken down for you over the next few weeks. With that being said, there is a complete meta, player roles and tactics video as the first video that I uploaded for FC25, and the link to that will be in the comment section down below, and it recommends the best tactics and player roles based on the wing attack technique and what is effective in FC25. Whew, that took a while. I hope this helped you out on how to attack in FC25. If you haven't yet subscribed, what are you doing? This should not be free, and it's years of knowledge that I've acquired as a pro player, so be sure to subscribe. And of course, I am coaching. If you want to be a part of the coaching academy and get one-on-one coaching with me, I've taken many players from the low divisions to elite in a matter of a few weeks, so check it out. The link is down below, and of course, if you enjoyed this video, you may just enjoy this one here.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then I'd really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. And lastly, if you do want any pre-gaming fuel or supplement, then head over to atpscience.com, which is the first link in the description, and use the code DylanEtsATP at checkout to get yourself a discount. Not only is it the cheapest way to get supplements, but it helps me out a ton, guys, so thank you.